Greetings, metaphysicians. This is episode 124, The Evolution of Truth. And we are celebrating our 5-year anniversary of the Let's Get Metaphysical podcast on this episode and all the evolutions that the podcast has been through since its inception. And I'm excited to announce that there is now official Let's Get Meta merch available for patron angels of the podcast. Mugs, t-shirts, totes, you name it. Check that out at the end of the episode for more information. And please enjoy our 5-year anniversary.
You are listening to Let's Get Metaphysical. This podcast explores the spiritual and metaphysical world through the experiences and opinions of the host and those interviewed. It should not necessarily be seen as direct endorsement or personal advice to our listeners. We encourage you to use your own discernment, judgment, and intuition regarding anything you learn from this show.
Let's get meta.
Welcome to the Let's Get Metaphysical podcast. I'm your host, Renata Maniaci, here to remind you that you are a spiritual being having a temporary human experience here on lovely planet Earth. That's right. You chose to incarnate into this body, this planet, this situation, these parents, this environment. You chose that. And maybe it's your first time on this planet. That could be. Are you a sensitive soul? Does this whole place and way of doing things seem so bizarre and different and abnormal to you? If it does, that you could be a first timer. This could be your first time on this planet. Maybe you're from somewhere else. Maybe you're from a different galaxy, a neighboring galaxy, a different set of constellations and planets, different suns, different moons, and how they do things over there is your normal. You still feel that within your soul, and so here's a little strange. Or maybe this is your 10,000th lifetime on this planet, on planet Earth, and you feel super comfortable here, and you have been slowly but surely succeeding through all of your Earth lessons, growing little by little as you pass each test. And maybe in your next life, you will get to incarnate somewhere else. Maybe a higher consciousness level planet than this one currently is. Or maybe you won't even have a body in your next lifetime. Maybe you will get to ascend out of material life. These are all just things that I like to share and maybe have you think about. And this is season 7, Heaven on Earth. And this is episode 124, The Evolution of Truth. And we'll get into what that means in just a moment, but I wanted to say this is the 5th anniversary of the Let's Get Metaphysical podcast. And I can't even believe it. We started 5 years ago, May 1st, 2018, with our first episode. And so much has changed and evolved since then. And that's kind of what this episode is going to be about. Looking back, seeing how we started here and how it's evolved, and using that as a metaphor for how we all grow and evolve in all aspects of our lives, not just spirituality, and how that's okay. We can accept everything that we were and everything that we are and make room for everything that we will be. So with that, let's get right into it. Are you ready? Let's get meta. Masters and angels, I request your presence, guidance, and support through this episode. Please help these words to be useful to all listeners on their evolutionary journey. Please let me know the truth, speak the truth, become the truth, and be the truth. And please let this episode reach whoever needs to hear it. Thank you with gratitude and full faith. Bless creation. 5 years. I had no idea that I'd still be doing this. I had no expectations going into this whatsoever. I am still a complete student at this. You would think that I would have refined the technology and the perfect way to do things. And, I have, I guess, in some way. I do it in my own way. It's my own way. But 5 years in, I'm still just listening to my guidance around this whole thing. And that's how it started. A lot of you know this story already, but I had been getting the download, the guidance, the insight, whatever you want to call it, the whispers to start a podcast probably back in 2016. And I didn't know why. I don't I don't particularly enjoy my voice or hearing myself talk, believe it or not. And I didn't necessarily think I'd have anything very interesting to say, but I kept getting that nudge until finally one evening in 2017, late 2017, I was almost asleep and I got this really loud message in my head that said, go by the website. Because they had already given me the name and the whole idea behind it. And I was dragging my feet because I was like, really? A podcast? Like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know the technology. I don't know any of this. And it's still pretty rudimentary, really, this operation. And that's okay. But it is what it is. And I had help from one of my friends at the time, Zoe, who really helped with every single aspect of getting this podcast off the ground. And I'm still very, very grateful to her for that. And helping me with the confidence to just do this and start it. And all of this evolved from there. And the first 5 seasons, but especially the first 3 seasons, were very much an interviewee setup. And I was interviewing friends and people, both friends that are professionals in their various esoteric and metaphysical modalities, and people who I had just met or come into acquaintance with what they did in their fields. And I have to say, I love interviewing people. I would love to continue to interview people, even though that has not been on the docket for these last 2 years of the podcast. This whole thing started with 2 episodes, and this is where we get into the evolution of truth and just the evolution of ourselves in general, to see what twists and turns come along the way, what lessons we need to learn, what growth experiences we need to go through. This whole experience for me has been a massive growing experience, and it's been out there for whoever in the world wants to see it or listen to it. My first 2 episodes, as many of you know, were about the now infamous so-called John of God, the healer in Brazil. And I thought that those episodes turned out really, really well. They were beautifully edited by Zoe, and it was a massively important experience in my life to be down in Brazil and at that center at that time. And I did experience tremendous healing in different areas of my life with the 2 weeks that I spent there. And the people that are come across in those 2 interviews are very sincere in their experiences with this person, John of God. I don't think any one of them was trying to pull wool over my eyes, consciously anyway, or being anything but authentic and honest in their own lived experience. And I was at the same time trying to be very open and authentic in my experience of what happened there. And not 9 months, 10 months later, this person who had been healing, so-called healing, purported healing for 40 years, 50 years, was arrested for abusing hundreds of women who came forward in the fall of 2018, I think. I mean, there had been allegations apparently for years and years that I didn't know about. I just didn't know that. And even though I had these profound experiences, actually before I even went to Brazil, because I first saw him at the Omega Institute in New York City, or New York State. And the reason I went to Brazil is because I had such a profound experience there, right? And it wasn't the placebo effect. There was a very real thing that happened that I'm sure I've talked about on previous episodes that prompted me to go further and go down and visit the center. And I've talked about this before, but this is important because this is where this podcast began. These were the first 2 episodes. This is part of my evolution of truth. Even though I felt these things and experienced very real change and transformation within myself, it was undeniable that this person was also an abuser of women, and maybe much worse allegations as well that have been leveled against him in this time since then. And I immediately knew that these allegations were true because of an experience I had while I was in Brazil that I had talked myself out of, that I had convinced myself didn't really happen or wasn't, or I must have been reading the situation wrong or something that I was thinking was wrong, and that didn't happen. And I went into that in my bonus content after my 13th episode. The first episode of my 2nd season is called The Misuse of Metaphysical Power. And it is directly talking about John of God. So it's really kind of interesting that my first 2 episodes of season 1 are about John of God. And the first episode of my 2nd season is also about him and about the misuse of power that he exhibited. And in the bonus content of that episode, I go into my experience of why I knew that those allegations were true and how I had talked myself out of a true experience that I had while I was in Brazil with him. But that is part of the learning experience. That's part of the growth for me. That's part of my own lessons in discernment. You can imagine how I felt when I heard all of this and knew it was true based on my own experience, knew it was true. And I had to face myself in that. Number one, I had started this whole podcast with that experience, with this person headlining to start my podcast. And I had to reconcile that with the actual lived experiences that I did have there and try to understand what had happened. And not only that, sharing that with all of you who may have listened to my episodes and been inspired to go down and see him with the potential for being abused, right? So I don't take that lightly. This is something that I've thought very deep about. And also I believe that everything happens for a reason and that we can learn from everything we do. So I didn't take down those 2 episodes. Many people have asked why. And I guess my answer is it's part of this experience for me. It's part of my evolution. It's part of my learning. It's part of maybe your learning. It's part of the truth of how this started and how I have evolved and learned and understood discernment. And I'm profoundly grateful to have had that experience because over the course of this podcast, as you've been listening, I have seen so many different types of healers and shamans and astrologers and psychics and all kinds of people with all kinds of modalities. And just like any other arena, any other industry, right? You need to learn discernment. It doesn't matter if it's spirituality and metaphysics and religion, if you want to loop religion in here, which, I'm not religious, but that's okay. It's just like that in every other industry. Anything you can think of. Politics, healthcare, education, transportation, auto mechanics, anything, any area or industry, you have to learn discernment because there are people, there are humans, there are beings everywhere that have varying degrees of lightness and darkness and various degrees of consciousness of what they are even. Some people are evil and they know it. Some people are good and they know it. And then there's everything else in between. Some people have no idea, no conscious connection with what they are doing and what they're putting out into the world. Now, in the case of John of God, this man knew what he was doing. This was not some, I'm being taken over by a spirit and he's the one that's making me do these things to these women. No, he knew what he was doing, right? So there was a point in my own journey, in my evolution, where I thought that this man was along the same lines as other teachers, other healers that I had been associating with or have been associating with since then. And I was incorrect. I was immature in my discernment. I needed more experience to understand, this flavor is like this, and this flavor is different. This is more bitter, and this is more sweet. Just like that. You can use that analogy. You can use smelling different scents. This smells like blueberry muffins, and this smells like rhubarb pie. They're different, right? And so as we move forward on our journey, hopefully we are learning. And not only learning, we're taking responsibility for our learning, right? So this has been a journey. I mean, just, seasons are kind of arbitrary in podcasts, at least for me, the podcasts that have like, this season is all focused on this one story. And, there's so many murder mystery podcasts or true crime podcasts that get a lot more downloads than this one. But, for all intents and purposes, I don't really need to do seasons in my podcast, but I did. And so the first 3 seasons had 12 episodes each, and they were all of them me interviewing people. And I interviewed some amazing people, some people who I'm still really close with, and some people who I was close to at the time, and some people that I didn't even know and just dropped in. I mean, we did so many things. We talked about different energy modalities like the Healing Touch program. We talked about plant medicine, psychics. We talked about astrology, shamanism, hypnosis, people who speak with animals, communicate with animals. And that was all just in the first season. And it was amazing. And like I said, I love interviewing. And you know what? Maybe this show will evolve. I think I will have guests on in the future. I think we're moving in that direction slowly. But I really miss interviewing people. And season 2, we talked about the misuse of power, talked about meditation, sound healing, the emotion code. We talked about dreaming and travel and education for the new earth, angels, guides, ghosts, solstices, equinoxes. And I met some really awesome people that season that I didn't know about before, but they just kind of popped in. And then I started getting people emailing and asking to be guests on the podcast. And I still get that. And I don't feel bad because I'm doing what I'm being told to do by my guidance, but there's so many people who have asked to be a guest on here, and so many of them I would actually love to have because they'd be really interesting to talk to, but that's just not what I'm supposed to do right now. And season 3 also had 12 episodes, and there was crystals and stones and UFOs and aliens, abductions, healing art, using art to heal with Barbara Evans. I mean, I love Barbara Evans. I have her artwork still all over my house. Looking into awakening and exploring the dark and how to protect yourself spiritually and have boundaries, how to raise your vibration, numerology, talked about Moldavite, talked about indigo, rainbow, star children, however you want to call them. I talked to this amazing person, Deepak Ramala, who, I'd love to connect with him again. I just met him on my path, and he's this amazing person doing these incredible things. And he's, I think, like a couple of years younger than me. He was just already out there in the world and affecting millions of people. And then how to connect with your highest guidance. I mean, that was season 2. Even moving on from there into, all of this, there's just so much, so many things that you can learn about in metaphysics and spirituality. And there are traps. There are ways to go astray, just like anywhere. You can be led astray in any industry, in any arena, in any line of work. And so we learn and we talk to people and we hear their experiences and we grow from that. And I haven't even, there's so many of the people, the guests that I've had on here that I haven't connected with for such a long time, or even since the episode was. And there's just so many opportunities to learn and to grow in your consciousness and to grow in your truth. Because if you're at one level of consciousness, let's just use age. Let's say you're at a level of consciousness when you're 25, and there's these things that are true at that time. And then you're evolving, and there's a different level of consciousness that you reach when you are 35, right? And the truth evolves. I'm not going to say it changes, because truth is truth. But knowledge is structured in different levels of consciousness. And what does that mean? That means that when you're at a certain point of your life, X, Y, and Z might be true. Okay? And as you grow in consciousness, those truths may evolve and look different than they did at a previous level of consciousness. And that is the evolution of truth. And that is how, if you are moving forward in your life, things should be. Should is a strong word that I don't like to use very often. But when you are 5 and you're learning about the world, there are things that you learn when you are 5 that will remain true your whole life. Like if you touch a hot stove, you are going to get burned. That's pretty much going to remain true throughout your life. And there's different things that you could add to that. You could say, well, if you have an oven mitt on, you could touch the stove and not get burned. That is also true, right? But then there's things like when you're 5 and you think that, I don't know, we all have different examples of when we were young and thought something, right? So my example, I guess, can be that for an inordinately long amount of time, I thought that the word was panna cake as opposed to pancake. Okay. I think I was confusing it with the rhyme patty cake, right? So I thought that until I was like 17, I said, can we have pancakes today? So that's what I'm talking about, right? But as you grow, you learn that even though when you're 5 and you hear that and that's what you think that is, and that is for you, that's true for you. A pancake is a pancake and you're going to eat it and it's going to be awesome. But, you get to another level of truth and it's actually, it's pancake. Okay, well, great, that's true. And that's your next level. This is a crude example, but this is explaining how truth evolves. And I talked so much about these first 2 episodes of this podcast because that truth evolved, what I came to learn in time. And I probably still have more to grasp from this experience. I really do. I'm not saying, all right, I cracked the code on that whole thing. I know exactly what happened and why it happened to me. I think I know a lot more than I did at that time. But I had to go through this experience of not only feeling this healing from this person myself and also feeling this contraction within me that happened while I was there, but also have potentially the karma of sharing that experience with the world in a positive light and potentially having people decide to look more into that because of things that I had said on this podcast. So that's a whole thing. And it's okay. The truth evolves. And my truth evolved with that. And then we went to season 4. Season 4 was amazing. That's kind of when I first stepped out of the box a little bit. The first 3 seasons, I was interviewing different people every single episode on all different things. On season 4, it was the season of miracles. And I spent those 12 episodes all on one topic, which is my current, I guess I would call it a spiritual community with our spiritual teacher. And it was all about this community, this teacher, and the miracles that people have experienced through that work. And I love this season because there's 50 different people really just sharing their authentic, true experiences of what they would call a miracle through this work, right? This is, in their own words, this is miracles with physical health and healing processes, from healing Lyme disease and things like sarcoidosis that have no conventional cure at this time, to things like healing depression and anxiety, and also having miracles with money and miracles with pets and other loved ones, and miracles that happened when the teacher wasn't even there physically, remote healing miracles. And then, learning how to actually become your own miracle worker, which is something that we do in this community. So you don't always have to go to somebody else. You don't always have to, it's always good to ask the angels for help. That's what I do. But learning how to become someone who can kill your own virus, your own infection, so that you can evolve in that way, right? So that's what that season was about. That was incredible. And then I feel like there was a profound shift from season 5 moving forward to now. I started to do solo episodes for the first time in season 5. Some of them, I'd say about half of them, were just me and allowing myself to talk about what was coming through. And half of them were still interviewing people, really amazing, cool people about different things, different ascension tools with Victor Sims. I'm just looking at the list right now. These people are incredible. And I ended up that season with interviewing the last person, the last guest that I've had on the podcast, even up until now, was Dr. Norma Milanovic, who wrote The Light Shall Set You Free, which I guess she would say was kind of channeled. And she also wrote We the Arcturians, which I read long after I had read The Light Shall Set You Free, and that was similarly enlightening. But season 5 really started this, I called that season The Great Awakening. And funnily enough, I had no idea that that was a term that was being used by what much of the mainstream media at the time was calling conspiracy theorists. This was when COVID started. This was when 2020, this was during 2020 when all that happened, when everything started going down around the world with the pandemic. And I didn't even realize that I had named that season after this really provocative phrase that was being used at the time. That's how in it I was. But at the same time, I was starting to realize some things and understand some truths. This is the evolution of truth, right? Some truths that started becoming so blatantly obvious that were hidden from me before, that I had not seen. Different ways in which the world worked. And that was probably pretty obvious through some of my episodes. Let's see what I did then. Remembering Who You Are in the Great Awakening, How to Stay Positive in Transformative Times. That was right when the pandemic was going on. Red pill or blue pill, a very blatant matrix metaphor, association, phrase, whatever you want to call it. how to exit the matrix. That was one of the episodes that I did then. It was, we also had Darlene on. Oh, she's the best numerologist ever. Do you guys remember Darlene? I think I've had her on twice. That was really cool. But my truth scale started to really dramatically move throughout that season as I looked for news sources that were not the mainstream news, but were no less worthy of being heard, at least. And this is when a lot of censoring was starting to happen. And even that in itself was so interesting, right? Because you're like, why is there censoring happening? We have free speech in this country, at least theoretically. Like, why can't these people just say what they are wondering about and questioning about and looking into? So that really prompted me to do more episodes on my own. And that was the guidance coming in then, was to start after that season. I started season 6, and my seasons got longer and longer after season 4. That went to 17 episodes, and it went to 20 episodes in season 6. And oh my gosh, right now we're almost on 40 episodes in season 7. So, the seasons are becoming a little bit arbitrary, like I said before. But that was the guidance, was to start allowing what was coming through me to come through, and to try not to filter it as much as possible, which is difficult sometimes because I have a fairly strong mind and it wants to speak and be heard and be articulate and make sense and cross all the T's and dot all the I's and etc. And I think sometimes that my mind comes through a lot, and sometimes my heart comes through, and sometimes my soul comes through. And I think these last, 60 episodes, I guess it's pretty much half the podcast, if we're looking at that now, has been me trying to become as clear as possible and allow what comes out, because I do trust my high self. I do trust the information and the things that are coming through. And I think that my experience with the evolution of my truth, especially from the first episode and through the year 2020, 2021, when all of this madness was happening in the world and the censorship and all of these things were happening, I really did not want to be responsible again for putting something out there that led people astray or led people into a bad situation or a dark situation. And since the very first episode, I've always had a disclaimer, which I'm really grateful for. And I mean that disclaimer. I always want you to think for yourself. As I said in the last episode, I always want you to question everything, not just what I say, but what anyone else says, any information that you get from anywhere, and really try to not only do your own material, earth-bound physical research, but sink into your own heart, sink into your own soul, because we do have an innate sense to feel what is true or not and what is bullshit or not. Many of us have become really disconnected from that, purposefully, very purposefully disconnected from that. And that's a lot of what I was talking about in my season 6. I started that season with the 3 episodes, The Battle for Minds, Waking Up from Mind Control Part 1, and Waking Up from Mind Control Part 2, followed by How to Discern Truth. Those were the first 4 episodes of season 6, so you could tell where my mind was at that time. And I'm really happy about the evolution of this podcast. And, this isn't Joe Rogan. This isn't This American Life. There's not millions of people listening to each of these episodes. This is not created for widespread consumption, at least not at this time. The listeners have continually been going up for the last 5 years, ever since I started the podcast. And there's enough people listening that it is worth it to do this. I'm at, I think, just over 200,000 downloads, which isn't, super duper high if you're looking at a YouTube star sensation or, like a Joe Rogan podcast, but it's also not nothing. There's enough people who are tuning in here that the guidance is to continue for now. And if the guidance is ever saying, okay, you've done that, time to close down, then I will. And that's how it works when you're listening to your inner guidance and following your truth and your path in that moment. I'm just trying to be as open and unattached as I can because I'm sure I won't be doing this for forever. But right now, it's still serving. With season 6 came a lot of new truths for me as well. I started out talking about what I had said I was talking about, all those things that I mentioned before, and then talking about surrender and talking about remembering why we came here and how to be fearlessly present and dying to evolve. I mean, that was a really powerful episode in a really powerful moment in my life. Talking about paradigm shifts and how birds of a feather incarnate together. And, I did this episode called How Plants and Drugs Affect Your Consciousness in season 6. And that, even just that I did that episode, shows how evolved I became for myself. I don't, try to say anything for anybody else, but on the issue of psychedelics, on quote unquote plant medicine, on drugs and alcohol, smoking, and all of that. And I definitely evolved on that. I was never big into any of that, but I have tried some of it, and I've talked about that in previous episodes. But I've really reached a point, and I talked about that in this episode, about how much, if not all of these things, are spiritual traps. And I expected to get a lot of backlash for that, especially from people who use marijuana, because it's so widespread. I mean, it's practically pushed on us right now. It's like people are encouraging people to get high. And I still feel that that's a spiritual trap. I think it's a lot more dangerous spiritually than we realize. And that is how my truth evolved, and maybe yours has too, or maybe it's gone the other way, and that's okay. All different paths. And now we're in season 7, which, like I said, has almost 40 episodes in it. So definitely threw the 12 episode seasons out the window. And still listening. Some of these are very much how-to episodes, and they're almost like courses, and some of them are not. Some of them are just things that are dropping in that moment and may make sense, hopefully make sense to some people who are still tuning in. And they will reach, some of you will be downloaded with certain information and codes in one episode and get absolutely nothing out of the next episode, and that's great. That's okay. Man, what did we start with in season 7? Through You, Heaven on Earth, because season 7 is Heaven on Earth. That was what came down to be the name. Past Lives Matter. Oh, what a great episode. I think there's a future episode coming up that is Past Lives Still Matter. That's so important. It's like one of the basic tenets of why I do the podcast is, I start every episode saying, here to remind you, you're a spiritual being having a human experience here on lovely planet Earth. That in itself is indicative of having had past lives. And then I go from there talking about how karma works and how to mitigate your karma, how to communicate with angels, being grateful, having clear intentions. Oh my gosh, we've been through so much. Oh, and then episode 100, It's Time to Wake Up. That was just a year ago. That was episode 100, and we're at episode 124. Yeah, that was 24 episodes ago. How to clean your body, how to clean your mind, how to clean your spirit. I'm just sitting here looking through this episode list from the beginning until now and seeing how much not only this podcast has evolved, but my own sense of reality has evolved. My own sense of what is true has evolved. My own sense of the nature of this creation has evolved from where I was when I started speaking into this microphone and where I am now. And it's been 5 years. And if I'm still doing this in 5 years, and I have no idea if I am or not, how much will my worldview and my sense of what is true and real in this world will have changed from this point until then? It's my hope that all of us are growing and moving forward. Honestly, if you have not had some kind of massive paradigm shift, especially in the last 3 years, maybe you should. I think it's healthy to have at least one major thing that has completely done a 180 in your life, especially recently. Having been one way or thought one way or believed one thing or trusted one party or whatever, and then have the veil pulled up on that particular thing to see a little bit more clearly about what the reality of that situation is. I think that's healthy. I think that that promotes the evolution of truth and the evolution of your consciousness, the raising, the elevation of your consciousness, of all of our consciousnesses. That is what is happening on Earth right now. That is why we're here on some level. And of course, we don't remember that right now. This is the planet with the veil. Maybe other planets have veils too, but this one has a nice thick veil. And we forget. When we incarnate here, we forget the mission. We forget the creator. We forget that there's angels. We forget that there's God. We forget that there is a purpose and lessons that we are coming to learn, and that there's karma that we are going to burn off and that we have to clear and balance while we're here in these physical 3D material bodies, instead of, for example, being incarnate on a planet where you don't need a body, you don't need to eat, there is no disease. There are places like that, but we are here, which indicates on some level that we have karma to square before we can go move on into maybe those more pleasant dimensions, pleasant planets, pleasant experiences. Maybe we aren't ready for that yet because we're here in this physical body, helping this planet to raise its level of consciousness. And we all play our roles. Some people are in the roles to do the horrific things that help all the rest of us to wake up. That's the evolution of truth. And when we leave our bodies, when it is our time to drop the body and move on to the next stage, we will remember. You will get to see, oh yeah, this was my mission. Did I do it? What did I do? What did I accomplish here? Did I remember enough? Did I waste it? Did I square the karma that I came to square? Did I learn the lessons I came to learn? Did I create more of a mess for myself? Did I clean up most of my mess? Did I make it to the next level so that I don't have to come back here and do this again? Do I have to come back here and do this again? Did I learn anything? Did my consciousness grow? Did I complete the reasons why I came here? This is the evolution of truth. It should continue to evolve. So, my heartfelt message, I guess, for you today on this wonderful 5-year anniversary of the podcast. I still can't believe it. And there's been so many of you who have helped along the way. From day one, I have patrons who I call my patron angels, patron saints. I have patron angels that make this podcast possible. And I have a handful of the ones that started as patron angels from day one 5 years ago that are still in the community. And they don't need to be. They've done their time. They're just supporting me. And some of them are still there. And then there's a whole host of new ones. And people move in and out from being patron angels. And I am so grateful for every moment. Even if you come in for a week, if you come in for a month, You come in for a couple months, maybe you stay for a year and then you move on. That's fine. It has enabled this podcast to continue. And I'm so grateful to all of you. But the message I have for all of you, and this, the 5th anniversary of the Let's Get Metaphysical podcast, is allow yourself to evolve in truth. If you believed something your whole life and you are being shown that that is no longer true, allow yourself to move forward to truth, to the next evolution of truth. Even if it's been with you for so long, even if you're finding out things that are blowing your mind and your knee-jerk reaction is to just hold steady and to not believe and to put blockers on your eyes, like that the horses have. They can only see forward and they just keep moving forward even though they don't see anything else around them. Don't allow yourself to do that. I have a feeling that we are in incredibly transformative times right now. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to see that. There are going to be things that we hear about and see with our own eyes that go against everything that we were told and everything that we were taught from day one over these next several years, maybe our whole lifetimes. And I encourage you and me, all of us, to be open to truth, no matter how that looks, because oftentimes what's really true, the highest level of truth and truth, is the most extraordinary, inexplicable thing. It's not the obvious thing sometimes. It's the most out there extraordinary thing. It could be the most upsetting thing. It could be the most amazing thing. It could be the most revolutionary thing, the most transformative thing, the thing that would completely change our world and our society for the better. It could be any of those things. But allow yourself to evolve and to resonate with truth, whatever it is. Allow yourself to be open enough and high enough of consciousness to just gently let go of things that are not true, things that are false, things that are lies, things that were and have been shoved down our throats. In anything. I'm not calling out any one thing. But if you are starting to see a new path and that is what is resonating with you on a deep spiritual level or on a deep physical level, and you just know for some reason that this thing that you used to think was true and right and correct is not anymore, then evolve through it. We've all been doing that this whole time, and some of us have a harder time than others just accepting that and taking responsibility from where you were at that time, and then just moving forward openly and honestly and authentically. I will continue to try to do that with this podcast for as long as my guidance tells me I'm supposed to do it. And maybe one day the guidance will say, okay, you're done with this. And then I'll be done. But we can all continue to evolve in truth. And that is my hope for all of you. I'm going to leave it there for today. And I also wanted to announce, like I stated at the top of this episode, we are doing a little promotion. I'm excited about it. In honor of our 5-year anniversary at the podcast, I have added official Let's Get Meta merch to the podcast's Patreon. So every tier, after being part of that tier for 3 months, gets a different item of official Let's Get Metaphysical or Up and Awaken Productions merchandise. It could be a mug, it could be a t-shirt, it could be a tote bag, it could be a sweatshirt. Go to patreon.com/letsgetmeta to check that out. And even if you only want to be in for 3 months, get the merch and get out, that's your prerogative. And that's my gift to you for being part of this journey. Seriously. And that first tier, the $8 tier, the cherub tier, as we call it, that is going to be a limited edition merch. So get in there now. If you want that, go up, sign up, become a patron angel for 3 months, get your awesome Let's Get Metaphysical mug and get out. But just do that. Let's celebrate this 5 years together. I would love to have you in the community, even for a little bit. So go check that out. And I hope all of you enjoy that. I know all my existing patron angels are really excited about that. And so that is going to be an excellent addition to celebrate our 5 years. I am going to leave it there for today. Thank you so much for being on this evolution of truth, this evolutionary journey, this rising of the level of consciousness for the planet with me. Stay positive, stay safe, and stay meta.
The Let's Get Metaphysical podcast is an Up and Awaken production and is produced and hosted by Renata Maniaci. Our intention is to raise the vibration of the planet by sharing, validating, and normalizing spiritual and metaphysical experiences. If you are ready to raise your vibration, you might enjoy our free Let's Get Meta Master Clearing. To receive the Master Clearing or to learn more about the podcast, visit letsgetmeta.com. We like to share metaphysical stories and answer spiritual questions on the podcast. If you have a metaphysical experience you would like to share or have a spiritual question you would like to have answered, please send an email to info@letsgetmeta.com. The Let's Get Meta podcast is inspired by angels and supported by angels. If you would like to be an angel donor to the podcast, visit patreon.com/letsgetmeta. Thank you for listening. Stay meta.
Let's get meta.
Metaphysical.
Let's get meta.
Metaphysical.
Let's get meta.
Metaphysical.
Let's get meta.
Metaphysical.